Greetings Exiles, BullShifter here back with another Path of Exile PS4 video. Today I'm going to briefly be going through my build and how I've updated it since the beginning of the season. Now for those of you who watched my build video at the beginning of the season, well it was actually a couple days before the season started, I was kind of playing with a few different things I hadn't used before, doing a little bit of theory crafting and just trying some new things in general. Now this build is a bit improved from that. It's been kind of adjusted based off of what I've seen so far from the league itself. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. I'm going to be sharing the skill gems I'm using, the different items that I'm using, and the passive tree, and kind of explaining why I've decided to pick the skills that I have picked. So first off, this is a very budget-friendly build. I only currently have two actual uniques that I'm using. One is Kondo's Pride. The reason for this is strictly because of the amount of physical damage that this weapon does. So as a base, I have 233 up to 431 base physical damage. And on top of that, I'm looking at 303%, increased physical damage, on the item. That's raising that physical damage up that high. So, essentially, it's got strong base physical damage. It does have 0.6% physical attack damage leech his life. That's a bit of a wasted stat, to be honest, just because I've already maxed out how much, attack damage I'm leeching his life currently. Leech life, for those of you who don't know, at 1.6% it caps. So I have well over that, so that's a bit of a wasted stat, which is fine. The biggest reason to have this is that high base physical damage. The accuracy rating is really nice. The 50% increased melee damage against bleeding enemies is nice as well. We can't leech life from critical strikes, however, I've kept this character at a very low crit strike. So if I go over here and look at my skills, and look over at Cyclone, you can see I only, for my main hand critical strike chance, at 5%. So it's going to help us proc, that bleed every now and again, but not so often to the point where we're not going to be efficiently leeching life as we're hitting everything. And we also have that 30% chance to blind enemies on crit strike and the 50% to cause bleeding on crit strike. So it's still going to be useful when we do hit that. The other unique that I have here are the Windscream Reinforced Greaves. The biggest reason to use these is obviously high base armor. There's some elemental resistances. There's some movement speed. The elemental damage, that's admittedly a wasted stat. However, the biggest reason why I've equipped these boots is being able to apply an additional curse. I'm running dual curses on this character as an aura. I'll show you how I have that set up as well. But in order to do that efficiently, I need an item, a skill tree node, or something that grants me an additional curse, because by default you can only actually apply one curse, so this allows me to apply two at the same time. The rest of these items are all rares, so there's just a few different stats that I've essentially focused on. My base stats that actually allow me to go ahead and use all of my skill gems as they've leveled up. Accuracy rating is nice to have. It's not something I've necessarily focused a whole lot of attention onto. Life is a key one. Obviously, my resistances, physical damage, as I had mentioned previously. A little bit of mana, just because of the fact that since we are using dual curses as auras, it is reserving 70% of my mana. So I do need at least a little extra mana in order to help me out there. That's essentially it. Armor and life are the big ones, and resistances, along with physical damage on my weapon. And, that essentially, covers the stats, and then, the different attribute points that allow me to actually use my skill gems that I have. So with that, let's go ahead and look into the skill gems. So right now, this is only a 4-link. I do have all of the skill gems I plan on using on this once it does become a 6-link. But this is my Cyclone setup. So I'm using Cyclone as my base skill. Brutality support, it's adding a lot more physical damage. It's taking away any elemental damage that it would do to make up for that increased physical damage, but I'm not trying to do any elemental damage. This is a strictly physical damage build, so I'm not losing out on anything there. Melee physical damage support, very self-explanatory. It's more damage to my Cyclone. and Pulverize support, which gives me increased area damage, a larger area of effect. It does decrease my attack speed a little bit, but we will make up for that in the skill tree. But we do deal a lot more damage. So this is, again, another damage buffing skill. Right now, this one is subject to be swapped out potentially, but at the time being, I'm using Maim support. It may turn into Impale support. Right now, I don't have any Impale passives assigned, but for boss fights, I have strongly considered it. So during those last 10 excruciating levels, I may start to put some of those Impale effects on this character, in which case I would likely swap out Maim support for Impale support. But Maim support is essentially here just for more physical damage. Maim slows down your enemies, so it's also, going to give me more opportunities for me to hit them, as they have less opportunities to hit me because of them being slower. But that's more of a bonus than an actual essential skill for this build. Infused channeling support is just really great to have on any channeling skill in general. I highly recommend it. It's going to give us more damage and make our effects last longer, essentially. So that is something that is on Cyclone as well. Here, I'm using Blood Rage. This is essentially for giving me a bit more of attack speed and, some extra leech. This is also going to cause me to take gradual damage, as I'm leeching, but we're going to be leeching so much life because we're going to be hitting so much faster that it's going to negate that. It's going to give us frenzy charges, so it's going to be more beneficial than hurtful, but typically I'm only going to use this in areas that are largely populated or for boss fights. Increased duration is just going to increase the duration of that skill. Ancestral War Chief. This is just a totem that we're going to summon. It's going to attack for us, and it's also going to offer us some more melee damage. It's going to have the potential to cause enemies to bleed. Obviously, we get that damage buff against bleeding enemies, so this can help trigger that for us. And faster attacks, just so that way it's getting more attacks out, so potentially causing more bleed. On our boots is our movement skill. We're using Leap Slam, pretty self-explanatory. Endurance charge on melee stun support. So this is basically making it so we're getting endurance charges when we use our Leap Slam in on a fresh group of enemies. Since we gain an endurance charge whenever we stun, an enemy with a melee hit from supported skills, Leap Slam will always stun enemies that are at full health. So we're going to use this to leap in, slam, stun, and then Cyclone, which is going to give us, that bonus damage, and it's going to give us endurance charges, which is going to help us defensively also. Fortify support. This is also going to be a very large part of this build. Fortify is pretty standard on movement skills for most builds. It's going to go ahead and, help us deal more melee damage with our Leap Slam, which isn't a huge deal, but mostly it's going to go ahead and give us some defensive support, and as I'll show you on our passive tree, it's also going to give us some offensive support as well, which is why I had mentioned that having these stuns is actually going to help us do a bit more damage along with Fortify. Faster attack support just helps us Leap Slam, more often, since that's based off of attack skill. On our gloves, this is our curse setup. So I do have Blood and Sand. I typically am sitting in Blood stance, so that way I'm just doing more area damage, taking a little bit of a hit to area of effect, but the area damage, in my opinion, is worth it. So we're using Blasphemy support. Now this is going to turn our curses, instead of castable curses, into auras. So basically anything we come into contact with is going to be hit with the curses attached to this. At a cost of a 35% mana reservation. So since we have 2, it's actually going to hold 70% of our mana in reserve that we can't use because we're casting these curses. However, these curses are super beneficial. Enfeeble, this is a defensive curse, so this is essentially reducing our opponent's accuracy, their crit strike multiplier, their crit strike chance. They're going to deal less damage. So it's just purely defensive for us by essentially debuffing our enemies. and vulnerability, which is actually doing the opposite. This is a damage buff for us. So they're going to be cursed. They're going to take additional physical damage. They're going to have a higher percentage chance to be maimed. They're also going to have a higher percent chance of, having bleed inflicted upon them as well. And they will take increased physical damage from damage over time, which is things like bleed. And I believe Impale would count as that as well. I would have to double check, though. I'm not 100% sure on that one. Lastly is what we have slotted into our helmet here. So far, I just have Summon Lightning Golem. I can potentially go ahead and link that up with, minion life support, speed, increased health. But I'm really only using the Lightning Golem to actually give me the bonus attack speed. So what I've considered here, since I do have 3 free slots here, is putting a cast when damage taken on there, likely using something like Molten Shell, something that'll give me even more of a defensive buff, just because attack output wise, I do seem to be doing fine with this character so far. So that covers these skill gems and the items. It's super low budget. You can honestly get all these items for, I mean, even the rares, if you just buy them outright from people on the trade market, you could probably duplicate what I have here for less than 20 chaos. So this is, super beginner friendly, very budget friendly. For my flasks, these are going to change. However, I do have 2 healing flasks. I typically like to run 2 healing flasks. This is giving me an increased damage output, Quicksilver Flask just to help me move through more quickly, and an Onslaught Flask. Now, what's going to change about these is I'm likely, I won't be running to remove poison on use, simply because of the fact that I'll probably take the Pantheon eventually down the road where I'm immune to poison. I just find that one to be super useful. Because typically the 3 that I'll make sure that I'm running for sure for other benefits on my flasks are to remove poison, to remove bleeding, and to remove freezing. I'm going to be grabbing an Ascendancy node on my build that's going to make it so I don't take any bleeding damage while I'm leeching life, so basically while I'm attacking, which makes it so I don't really have to worry about bleed damage, so I probably won't put that on one of these flasks, but I will put a flask on here that removes being frozen for sure. But the base of these, I will probably stick with 2 healing, one of the increased damage consecrated ground flasks, one of the Quicksilvers, as well as, an onslaught trigger. Now for the skill tree, this is kind of where things get a bit more in depth. Contrary to what I would normally do, I actually did skip the first life node simply to grant some more attack speed, because attack speed, it equals leech life for us, which is super important. The quicker we can attack, the more we can actually leech. And there are some attack speed nodes we're going to be able to grab throughout this tree. However, there's not a ton as opposed to the different life nodes that we're able to grab throughout this tree. So I ended up going with the attack speed first. Again, another attack speed node. This is going to give us some more life here along with evasion and armor, more so the armor than the evasion. More physical damage. Master of the Arena. So this is the life regenerated per second. That's going to actually be negated later on. So that's a bit of a wasted stat. However, we're getting increased melee physical damage. +1 to the melee weapon attack range. And +20 to strength, which is directly going to increase our health, which is really nice. So increased life. Bravery, which is going to give us more armor and life, more increased life, and then Art of the Gladiator, which is going to give us a nice little boost to our attack speed, to our accuracy rating, and we ignore all movement penalties from armor, as well as getting some dexterity, which is going to be key for meeting our requirements for equipping all of our skill gems. So as we move down, these are just some 2-handed melee damage nodes. Pretty self-explanatory what we're doing here. We're going to be using, that 2-handed sword, as I showed you earlier. So these are just no-brainers to take, just essentially buffing our 2-handed melee damage. So we'll work to the right from here. Strength, the basic attribute stats, we'll skip past those just because they're essential to take as you're, branching out to the nodes you're trying to grab. But down here, just grabbing some more life nodes, essentially. Over here, These are going to be some leech nodes, so we grab these two down here. And as I had mentioned earlier, that 1.6 is actually, you know, the cap for the amount of damage that you can leech his life. So just from these alone, we're going, you know, 0.4% leeched his life, 0.8% leeched his life, 0.8%. So right there, we're at our cap. But, you know, we get some total recovery per second and some maximum total recovery per second from leech life, which are super important for us to have also. These are key for the way that I've set up my build. Since we are putting so much mana in reserve to use those two curses, it's essential that we're leeching some mana as well, so that way we can maintain our Cyclone. By taking Spirit Void, and the nodes that lead to it, this alone is enough to make it so that when we are running Cyclone, as long as we are hitting enemies, we're actually building more mana than we're spending. The only place where we may run into some mana regeneration problems is if we're running somewhat of an empty area and we're just constantly leap slamming. So that's the one thing I'll have to pay attention to. It hasn't been an issue for me, and as you're mapping later on and working into higher tiers, you're going to run into a lot less of these low populated areas. So there should essentially always be enemies for you to attack, so that way you can build your mana right back up. Vol Pact, so this is what makes it so that our life regeneration has no effect. However, it's doubling our life leech per second. So we're going to want to make sure we have enemies to hit. Otherwise, the reason why I have those 2 health flasks is so that if we do run into an empty area in between attacking enemies and we're put to low health, we can pop one of those, be right back up to full health, and be ready to attack the next group. So I do, at the time being, have an intelligence node. This is strictly for stat requirements for my gems. Hopefully I can get rid of this over time as long as I can stack enough intelligence on my gear, but we'll have to see. So around here, just, you know, this is for channeling skills. It's giving me increased attack damage and speed for channeling skills. Cyclone is considered a channeling skill, so this does give me, you know, directly more attack speed and damage with my Cyclone, as well as granting me endurance and frenzy charges. So that's going to help me do more damage and have a defensive buff there as well. From here, and this is the part that I'm actually currently working on, I branched out. I'm going to grab some more life nodes through here. And then the plan right after that is to come down here and grab these sword damage and accuracy nodes. It's going to give me some attack speed. At this point, accuracy doesn't really matter. It's high enough to the point where I'm not really missing any attacks anyways. But I'm really just looking for that extra damage and attack speed, which is super nice. So that kind of concludes that area over there. We're not going to build over there any further. Moving over here to the left, again, some intelligence and dexterity nodes strictly for stat requirements. I'll go down here first. So this is fortification bonuses. Earlier I had mentioned that Fortify was going to offer us some offensive buffs. That's normally not the case. Fortify is a defensive stat. However, with these nodes, I'm actually gaining some attack speed and some attack damage, along with, you know, some extra duration for my Fortify. So it's essentially turning Fortify into not only a defensive buff, but an offensive buff for me as well. So these nodes are going to be super useful for this build as well. Now from down here, just some more two-handed, you know, melee nodes. Just makes sense for us to take. We're using a two-handed sword, so these are pretty much essential. We'll go and build up. We'll go up this way first. Some more two-handed melee damage. Now there are more life leech nodes here. They are going to seem a bit excessive, since it's going to give us more of that, you know, percentage of physical attack damage leached as life, even though we've maxed that out. However, it's the percent of increased physical damage and, you know, the total recovery that we're looking for. So it's essentially going to make it so that you know, we can leech a bit faster and do more damage. So that's the reason for these. As we're building up through here, we want to build up to this, you know, area of life nodes. Self-explanatory, it's more life. We absolutely need those. The one thing you will notice about the Duelist is that there's not a ton of life nodes compared to a lot of other builds, so we try and grab them pretty much wherever we can. So this right here, increase to strength. The biggest reason why we're taking this node, because obviously we're not getting that life regen, it's to continue to build up this way. We're getting more maximum life, more life percentage, more melee attack speed, more accuracy, physical attack damage, more strength, and, some more melee damage and, two-handed melee damage as well. So this node I normally wouldn't take, except for the fact that it's building up towards more nodes that we actually need for this build. So that pretty much concludes, where I'm going to go in this area with this build. It is a possibility that I will branch out this way towards some more fortify nodes once I hit the higher levels. In all likelihood, after I complete those nodes, the life nodes and the sword nodes to the right that I had showed you earlier, I'm going to have roughly about 15 more skill nodes that I can use. So what I'm going to be focusing those on is likely, let's see, I believe they're over here somewhere. I think it's down here. Yeah, so I'll likely be focusing those either on some Impale, so that way, I'm stacking some more damage, because Impale basically takes some of your damage from each hit and stacks it onto the next hit. So it's something like Cyclone, it increases your damage output greatly. For the most part, I'm clearing through mobs really fast, but it's going to be really useful for boss fights. So I'll likely take some of those nodes, and there's some more over here. Potentially these fortify nodes, and the only other nodes I'd really consider grabbing that I haven't grabbed yet on this build would be for actual jewel sockets. But moving on to nodes I've actually grabbed, these are more life nodes. Again, self-explanatory. We want to grab as much life as possible. Some more sword damage nodes. I actually didn't realize I hadn't taken that one yet, so I'll have to come back and grab that one as well. And some more life and armor nodes through here. We continue to build up just a little ways just to grab some more life and some elemental resistances. So that's essentially the skill tree. I mean, it's really straightforward. We're grabbing some leech. I did originally build out this way, and I ended up respecking all of these. Believe it was actually these, I think. Yeah, so this was more life leech. But the biggest reason why I built down here initially was for that 30% increased damage while leeching. But it took me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, nodes, or, if I take the short way, 1, 2, 3, 4 nodes to get to that 30%. There were just quicker ways to build to that 30% and use less nodes on the skill tree. So that's why I decided to, kind of skip doing that. But I mean, for the most part, it's really self-explanatory. Fortify is a great skill, so turning it into an offensive buff as well is really awesome for this build. We go in, we leap slam, we cyclone, we do a ton of damage, and we prevent enemies from doing a ton of damage to us. We build up life where we can. We build up two-handed weapon damage and sword damage, since we went with a sword damage, a sword type of weapon. So we specialize ourselves that way. Spirit Void here was essential in order to maintain the amount of mana that we're using. The other option we could have gone with would have been over here, I believe it is, Blood Magic, where we could have used our life instead of mana. I'm not a huge fan of doing that, just because of the fact that we're already stacking our life leech in order to keep our life high, and I think that eventually in higher tier maps this could have been problematic in the long run. So I would have rather just, we're going down here and getting these nodes anyways, so it's literally a matter of us just spending one extra node to be able to make mana a viable option for us. So I think that was worth it. We grabbed our channeling skills. All in all, if you just do, your quick search filter and just, look for those nodes that are going to be beneficial towards your direct build, it's not that hard to do something similar to what I've done here. I have my specialties, damage output, attack speed, things that are self-explanatory, and just work with this build. So that's kind of, where I've gone with this build. Like I said, I've changed a few things from the initial video that you probably saw, but for the most part, the build's actually stayed pretty true to what it started off as. So definitely feel free to go ahead, ask me any questions you may have about the build down in the comments section. I'll be more than happy to answer. Maybe you're curious as to why I went with specific nodes or why I didn't go with others. And to be honest, like, I'm not a build master by any means, but a lot of these just seem like no-brainers for the direction that I went in with this build. So a lot of you have seen this build in action. If you have watched any of the streams recently, this is the build I've been running throughout all of Legion so far, and it's the build that I'll end up finishing Legion with. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully you learned a little bit of something about, creating your own builds, using the information that I've given you on what I've done with my build to potentially help you with your build. So thanks again for watching. Definitely appreciate it. Come check out the stream tonight. I'm typically online on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Friday nights. It does change a bit here and there, so the best way to catch me online is if you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, so that way you never miss a stream. So again, thanks for watching, and until next time, may the RNG be with you, always.